The funniest thing for me was when I told my dad about it. He was like, at first, he didn't really believe me. He thought it was a scam. He didn't let me quit my job in Brazil until I had actually started working. He was like, how did you even ask for that advice?
In today's episode, we have Julia, a software engineer at Turn.io and alumni of Le Wagon, the coding bootcamp. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, guys. Hi, Philip.
So you actually have interesting background. You came from a design background into software engineering. Tell us more about what motivated you into getting into software engineering.
It was something that was always kind of in the back of my mind. My dad was a programmer when I was a kid. Like, I always had a computer in my room. My dad told me that learned to write my own name in the keyboard before I even learned to write it by hand. When I was a teenager, I was very into blogging. So I was also into making like templates for me, for my friends. So I picked up a bit of HTML and CSS then, but it kind of passed. So I ended up going to design, but I didn't feel super happy working in the field. I had a hard time taking criticism when it came to my design work, I guess. I wanted more to be an artist than to be a designer. So it didn't work that well for me. And for a while, I also worked in film as an art assistant, art director, and doing things around filmmaking. But that life also wasn't for me. It was a very unstable life. So I kind of reached a point of crisis in my life with my mental health because at that point I was around like 29, 30, and I felt that my career hadn't really gone anywhere. I hadn't really like built something for myself. So I was thinking about could I do? How could I change the situation? Coding for me was something that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And looking into the industry more, I saw that it was something that I could get a job without having to go through another 4 year degree. Like, I didn't feel like I had that time available for me at that age. So I thought that it would be a good option. So that's how I decided to go into
Yeah.
that career. Yeah.
And so for listeners out there from creative backgrounds or designers themselves, what did you find that was hard or also what was easy given your background coming from a creative field like design into software engineering? Was there anything that was transferable or anything that was much harder
I
because of your background?
I think that the things that transfers the most is design thinking. And you learn a lot about like the process of designing something and building something. And I do think it's very useful for software engineering work because in a way you also have to design features. Of course, you have a design team, but you have to design your own implementation, and having that kind of framework of how to think about process. It was also useful for when I do some front end work, having some basics of design is always helpful.
Yeah, so you mentioned that when you made the decision to get into software engineering, one of the reasons why was that you found that you didn't have to go back to get like a 4 year degree. You decided to go the boot camp route. Can you tell us why you chose a boot camp versus going to college or self-teaching, and how did you choose your specific boot camp?
Initially, I did try to self teach myself, but at that time I had like super low confidence. So anytime I would go through like an online course and I would get stuck on something, I'd be like, oh, I'm just like too dumb for this. I don't have the aptitude, like the intelligence to do this. And I would have a lot of critical self-talk. And so self-teaching wasn't really working for me. I didn't feel like I could see the big picture of like building something with code. Like, I could do exercises, but it was hard for me to understand how everything would tie together into a working application. So I started researching bootcamps. I live in Rio in Brazil. I had heard of it as something that was popular like in the US, but I didn't know if it was available where I live. So I started researching and I found Levagon. And at the time, it was something really expensive for me. So I thought that I wouldn't be able to do it. But eventually, they actually had a job opening. I was following them on socials and saw they had a job opening. It was actually kind of like an internship. So I sent them the cover letter and my resume because in Brazil, you can only do an internship if you're actually in college, and I wasn't in college. But I kind of convinced them to turn the internship into a part-time job so they could hire me. I was very open with them. I told them that I wanted to do the course, basically, that I couldn't pay for it. And I didn't know. But at the time, the woman that became my boss had actually done the same thing when she was hired. So she immediately kind of had a connection with me, and I ended up getting hired by them as a kind of community manager and ended up also doing the course.
Yeah, that's amazing, but I'm curious how often that will work for anyone else out there to try to get into boot camp. So maybe more generally, what kind of advice do you have for someone that is thinking about enrolling in a boot camp? Were there things that you wish you knew before you went into it?
I think that you have to really temper your expectations, especially if you're doing like a 3 month, 6 months boot camp. Like mine was 6 months, but it was like part time. It wasn't a full time boot camp. It's impossible to teach you everything you're going to need for the job in that amount of time. Like you just have to know that when you get a job, there will be things that you have to study on your own and you have to complement your knowledge. Like it's just impossible. And that also, as with almost anything in life, what you put into it, you get back. You have to take it really seriously, especially with such a short boot camp. You have to dedicate yourself during those months because otherwise you won't get much out of it.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what did you still feel you had to learn before you got a software engineering job?
I didn't have to learn anything to get a job, to be honest. Like I got my job a month and a half after the boot camp. And in that time, I did study some things, but it wasn't anything that I studied in that month and a half that got me the job. What got me the job was really what I learned in the boot camp. But after I got the job, I had to learn a lot of things, especially about infrastructure, like what it means for an app to be in the cloud. I didn't really understand what that meant just from the bootcamp. And when I left the bootcamp, I went to work for a fintech company in Brazil that is like a huge company. So they had like microservices. It was a very different type of architecture than what I did in my like Ruby on Rails monolith on my bootcamp. I had to learn a lot of things like observability, but I did feel that I had enough of a basis to learn on my own. And I was also very lucky because the company that I joined was good about training junior developers. So I got lucky in that
Yeah.
way.
That's great. I think the expectation for anyone that goes into boot camp is that you're not expected to know everything before you work that job. A lot of the job of a software engineer is constantly learning new things. Speaking of that, like how did you get your first job and any advice you would give to anyone that is like a boot camp grad or someone that's self-teaching themselves how to kind of break into the industry and getting your first software engineering job?
I got my job through a Slack server. It was a certain kind of community for remote jobs. And it was an international community. When I got into the Slack and they had like that channel where you introduce yourself, and I said that was from Brazil, another Brazilian saw my post and was like, hey, this someone has like an opening for this kind of job. I think it would be a good fit for it. And he didn't even work at Sony. So it wasn't that he was hiring. He just saw it and remembered that he had seen the spot. And pretty much all my jobs have come through some kind of online networking. So that's something I always tell people like join Discord servers, join like Slack servers, try to network. If you can network in person, that's effective. But if you can't, then at least do it online. My last job I got through Twitter, which I never thought it would happen, but even that can be a place to network. For my first job, I just applied normally and did a technical test and interviews. It was a very normal type of process. I only knew about the job because I was involved in the tech community. So I always tell people to do that.
Yeah, what is the interview like for a junior developer, someone that's brand new? Is it still highly technical? Or what kind of questions do you remember them asking?
Mine wasn't very technical. The first step of the process was a technical test. They had something you had to do and you had to submit a test. And after, if you got the test right, basically you got called in for your first interview, which was with a tech lead. And they asked me questions like what I had studied in my boot camp. They had some questions about what I did in my test, why had I made certain choices versus others, stuff like that. It wasn't anything super technical. Those aren't all that common in Brazil. So, and then afterwards, I had another interview with an HR person that was like a cultural fit interview. And then I got hired.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you had lots of jobs already in this field. Can you tell us a little bit about how your salary has grown since you joined the field?
It has grown a lot, especially because at first I was working in Brazil and our currency is quite devalued compared to the dollar. My second job was at an American company, and now I work for Turn, which is technically an American company too. They are mostly based in South Africa, and both of my last jobs have been paid in dollars. So it grew like exponentially. My salary in Brazil was converting to dollars when I left Zone, which was like after a promotion, it was around like 1400 per year. So it's almost nothing, for example, in the US, but it was a good salary for a junior developer in Brazil. And afterwards, I went to an American company where my salary was around like 100K yearly. So that is quite
So
a
you went from
jump. Yeah.
1,400 to 100,000, basically like,
Yeah.
yeah, 100x your salary. That's amazing. Or
Sorry, it's not
was
1400, it's 14,000.
Oh,
Yeah.
14,000 still, 14,000 to $100,000. So 14,000 in Brazil, it sounds like it's still enough to have a decent life, but now $100,000, a big difference. Tell us, what was your reaction to getting an offer for a $100,000
Uh,
job when you were making 14,000 before?
it was it was kind of crazy. The funniest thing for me was when I told my dad about it. He was like, at first he didn't really believe me. He thought it was a scam. He didn't let me quit my job in Brazil until I had actually started working. He was like, how did you even ask for that much? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I asked around and everyone told me it was a reasonable range to ask. So that's what I asked for. And that's what I got. I didn't even understand. Like, for me, it was so much money. I didn't quite understand what it meant until it actually happened. So, yeah, I was really happy.
That's amazing. So if now everyone sees that, oh, Julia's doing so well, she's a software engineer, I want to be one too, and a family or a friend says, hey, I want to be one too. How would you tell them to kind of make sure that it's like a good fit for them? Like, how do you make sure they are making the right choice by becoming a software engineer?
I would tell them to actually try to write some code, try to build something, like offer help, to try and kind of mentor them and see if they think it's a good fit. You cannot always do some kind of online course just to check if you even enjoy it. And I think most of all, you have to be someone who likes solving puzzles. You have to be the person that looks at a problem, and it's interesting kind of breaking down the problem and trying to solve it.
What about how AI has played a role in your career so far? Like, how do you see AI affecting software engineering? So that's something that you are excited about, fearful about. Like, what's your opinions on it?
I'm excited about it as like an user. I worried about it as a human. I would say I'm very excited about it because I'm someone who really enjoys new technology and I love playing with new things. It can do a lot of good, but at the same time, it's something that we don't actually know exactly how it will impact society. It hasn't played a huge role in my career so far, but it's something that I'm starting to study more. And it's also something that we are incorporating more into our product now at my job. So, of course, I have to learn more about it. But yeah, I'm seeing it as one more tool, and I'm definitely paying a lot of attention to it and how it's evolving to also know like how it can affect my career. If I don't know how fast will things go if we're all going to get replaced. But I think it's something that I'm watching carefully, but also getting a little bit excited about it because I do think it can open up the field of things we can do.
And I'll leave this last question, like, what do you say is, like, your hottest take or maybe most controversial opinion about the software engineering industry?
Ah, I think that my hottest take, well, I think a lot of software engineers think that they had like a super hard job. At least I see this attitude a lot in the Brazilian software community, like, oh, like my job is so stressful and stuff. And for me, even if you have more stressful environments, but compared to other kinds of jobs, like it's a really cool job. I think some software developers think they're kind of sometimes above people in some way. For example, with AI, it can be humbling to know that one day you think you're building the future and the other day you can be replaced by something. So yeah, when it comes to hottest stakes, I think that's the hottest stakes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that your statements are very humbling. I think it's important for us to recognize that within a matter of a year, right? A year ago, no one thought that the industry might be affected by AI or layoffs or anything like that. And all of a sudden, it's happening, still happening. And I think it's important to keep that perspective that it's not
Yeah,
guaranteed.
exactly.
So thank you so much for your time. Yeah, Julia, who is a software engineer at Turn.io. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, your advice, and your journey with us.
Thank you so much, Alex. This is great.